this wonderful security on-premise. Your people are on your network. They're going through your firewalls, but they go home, and then they're no longer on your network. So then the question becomes is how do you extend the capabilities of your firewall beyond your premise? And one part of that comes with securing your mobile devices. So basically, you have
so you can skip it. If you don't want this slide, skip it.
yeah, okay.
Is this from the admin guide?
It's one of the quick start ones, but this one's like actually has moving parts. So it's in the quick start guide.
So Global Protect, in a sense, like how does it work on a mobile device or depending on what network you're on. So your user connects to your portal and it gets a list of your acceptable gateways, and you can load balance those. I've noticed in 8.1 you can actually geotag your gateways. You're saying if the IP address that the client's coming from is Asia, prefer the gateway in Asia, or if it's coming from a European geolocation, prefer a European gateway. That's something we've actually leveraged because we had users that were connecting to Global Protect, but they were getting a better response from the US gateway, but they were in the PAC rim. But when they actually connected, that led to very poor performance for SMB and other applications that are latency sensitive. So then the next thing that happens is the device will actually try to determine whether it's actually on your network. And it does this by resolving an internal address that's in your internal network. So if it can resolve an address to a public or a private address, it will return a valid result, and it will put the device in a state where it's connected, but it's not forming a tunnel, but it is still providing HIP data and user ID to the firewall itself. So if it's on-prem, the client goes to an internal mode, and it just does the HIP check and user identification. If it's outside of that, it's going to connect to the gateway based on the order of preference, and then it's also going to the closest, and there's also, if you have the case where you need to do geolocation based on source IP address, you can do that as well. And then once you're inside, all traffic is now subject to the firewall processing, and just like it would be as if they were on the network. So, and this kind of, this is a,
yeah, so
this is our environment. So I kind of took away all of our information, but essentially, as Josh mentioned, we have 3 firewalls running Global Protect, and we have our internal gateways, external gateways. So depending on if a user comes into the office, they hit the internal gateway, they go home, they hit the external gateway. What's really nice is it's one place to go. So our service desk just says hit that DNS name, access.your domain. And as you can see down here, we actually have 3 DNSA records. So it's just round robin. And it doesn't really matter which portal you authenticate against, because you can manage it with Panorama. So essentially, I go home, fire up my laptop, I connect to Global Protect. My PC is going to resolve access.our domain. I'm going to get one of these. It doesn't matter if it's Asia, Europe, or US. Once Global Protect connects in, it'll say, oh, you're from the US. As Josh mentioned, oh, I'm coming from the United States. This gateway is the best for you. And then it hands me into the gateway. We have around 2,500 devices. So as you can see up here, it's kind of hard to see, but we actually have a /20 DHCP pool. So at any moment, if one of these firewalls were to be unavailable, we could actually host all devices on any one of the gateways. So that's kind of how we have our setup. We haven't really run into any major issues with Global Protect. We do have always on at a few facilities, meaning when they're in the office, they have a little home icon. When they go home, fire up. As soon as they connect to the internet, it forms a tunnel to the external gateway, so they're always on the VPN, which is really great for your security posture. Another thing to mention is the gateways themselves. In our case, we did ADW US, EU, and SG. So what we did was we actually went out and bought a SSL certificate as a SAN cert, so it has a subject alt name. So we have the same certificate on all gateways and on all portals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm kind of probably clear on the external setup. Can you walk us through the use cases on the internal? Are you saying that every machine, every user is always going through the Global Protect? So
Yeah.
It's just I don't have experience, if you can walk me through that.
Yeah, so the internal gateway, like Josh mentioned, is for user ID. So
Okay.
when you get into the environment, right, and you log into your PC, you can interface your firewall to your AD controller, and now it knows that user based on the login. Or if they connect to wireless, the firewall will interface to a syslog feed, and it knows the user. You're essentially trying to put an IP address to a John Doe.
And
so that way in your firewall.
You have a client on the domain controller that will provide you that information.
Correct, that's another method. But Global Protect, the
Okay,
app,
so this is what you're using?
Yeah.
is another method.
Global Protect is actually a more definitive source of user identification than syslog reading or Active Directory, because all Active Directory log monitoring is doing is looking for events. User with, I logged on with this IP address, correlate that, put it in a table. But
Okay, but how about the servers and the non-human users?
Technically, you could put Global Protect on servers in an always-on state.
Yeah, so I mean the purpose of the like a server, there's not really a user associated with the server most of the time. So the policies that you're going to be pushing to
Well,
are
that's right, there's not a human user, there's a system user.
Yeah. So there could be a service account, but think about the security policies you're going to build to a server. It's usually a function that server is doing, and you're allowing access from whatever the client is to come to that server. So when you build a security policy out, you need to understand who is the client for that server and what is the resource that they're trying to access. That's what builds out that security, and that's based on the user, or if it's a server to another server communication. So like a web server to an app backend, then you need to understand the functions of what those are doing. You can utilize, in that case, a lot of people will just do IP addresses. You can utilize things like dynamic tags that are, hey, I'm pulling this tag from maybe VMware, if you've got a VMware environment, or if you've got an Azure environment and you're using the security tags in Azure, you can pull the tags from those to automatically populate those type of groups to build out your policy.
Okay, so that's good, I'm good. Now my only last question is, so we have the business layer, we have the application grabbing the input from the AD. What are exactly the pros and cons of doing it this way over?
Well,
just because I think,
I can actually answer that. So essentially when it comes to gathering user ID in CanOS, there's many ways you can do it. You can use like the Active Directory agent, you can use syslog, you can use Global Protect. The reason that Global Protect is superior to all of those other methods is that Global Protect, since there is a client that actually runs on the system, Global Protect is constantly sending that user ID information to the gateways, which updates the firewall's user to IP page. Okay?
Mhm.
Now, when it comes to Active Directory or other types of user ID sources, okay, user ID is only going to be as accurate as the feed. Okay, so with Active Directory, it may not be actually log off events. Okay, so essentially if it maps a user to an IP address, that user logs off the system. Now that user to IP mapping has to age out. Okay, with Global Protect, as soon as Global Protect loses connectivity, it will actually delete the user ID from the gateway. So where that becomes useful is if you have like a lot of roaming users, like say you have people going transitioning from like docking stations to wireless and whatnot. Okay, the way Active Directory works is it actually puts like an authentication token loaded on that client on the system, right? So if I go from a wired to a wireless connection, I'm going to switch IPs in that transition. However, the firewall is not going to update with user ID if I'm only using the Active Directory agent because a new logon event has not been generated. So when it comes to user ID,
that's true.
Yeah, when it comes to user ID, you want to make sure that you have 100% accuracy if you're going to actually use it for enforcement purposes.
Exactly.
And Global Protect gives you that 100% access.
Yeah, so like in our case, we're using user ID for all user access to the internet, right? So some users don't have access to the internet at our company. They're a shop floor worker. They might go to a shared PC to check email, but even then they don't have access to the internet. So we have specific policies and groups and Active Directory where our service desk can say, oh, you're an internet user, you sign the form, drag and drop into the group. Firewall now knows that user can get to the internet. So we really rely on user ID, and Global Protect is really great to keep it up to date. How we get around it, if it doesn't have Global Protect, is we actually feed syslog as well. So if they do connect to the wireless in our Cisco environment, our firewall.
Say that again,
So the syslog feed from our wireless controller, the firewall can feed that as well. So like as he mentioned, they go off the dock and onto the wireless. The authentication, the WPA2 authentication, radius that happens, it's going to show up in a syslog event, and the firewall now knows, oh, now he has this IP. So we actually, if you do a show on the firewall, he might have 2 IPs assigned to him. When he gets back to the dock, maybe DHCP is still active, so he gets the same address. So there's different ways of addressing this, but user ID is a really great way of locking down stuff.
And just to expand on user ID a little bit further too, now you mentioned group hacking too. So when it comes to user ID, the firewall doesn't just enumerate, just names to IP addresses. It can also query Active Directory and enumerate users to groups. So that way you can actually just reference 80 groups in policy too.
And we do that, and that's why we're going straight to the, I'm just trying to understand why,
Well,
yes, we're able to do that.
Okay.
another reason why.
Now, everything that I've heard, the whole business of buying wireless is the use case that I can see being used for.
Yeah.
Well,
The goal is just to make sure that you don't have any inaccuracies, because essentially if there is an accuracy and you're doing enforcement mode, then what's going to happen is you're going to have help desk data that's coming. You're going to have users complaining, hey, I can't do this, why not? Why is the firewall blocking me?
Well, the other big part of that too is if, just for various reasons, you may need to enforce longer age out times for your less accurate user detection methods, because maybe a client only authenticates every 2 hours, but if you're losing that every hour, you're going to start getting people getting the captive portal. Or what you could, if you extend your age out too long, someone could log off, then someone else could pick up that user association on the firewall and get access that they otherwise shouldn't have, or it makes your logs for URL filtering and other logging inaccurate.
One other thing actually with user ID is we do have like a Citrix environment as well. So that means multiple users may be on the same server using an app, and maybe one user has internet and the other user does not, but they're both using
terminal app.
correct.
Yeah, terminals.
So we've used that. That's another method.
So I just wanted to point out one more weakness in like the Active Directory agent, if you're just using that. When you have administrators using run as, that actually updates user ID with whatever account ran that application.
Yep.
And when that administrator is done, let's say you close out that application, the way that user ID works, the most important concept that I can convey to this whole room about user ID, the way it works is that the user to IP mapping database is an in-memory database in the firewall. Okay, like if the firewall reboots, all that user ID data is gone, and it'll have to re-update. But the way it works is that the last update that the firewall receives wins. Okay, so if I have somebody do a run as, and that person's like a service account or administrator or something like that, the user ID table will update, and then when that administrator closes, now it's no longer the user that's there, it's now the admin. The
And
other
we've-
thing too is
Yes, except what we do is we have a admin equivalent which tracks. So the user has an admin equivalent that.
But then you start getting.
There's ways to go about it, but I'm
You-
saying like if your goal is 100% accuracy for enforcement, you want to make sure you're aware of that.
In-
The other oddity is when it comes to a remote desktop. So if you have users that use RDP, and let's say there's like some kind of shared workstation for whatever reason, the way that RDP works is if a user just disconnects their session, Windows will still keep that session open. It'll just be a stale session. Say user B logs into that same workstation, user ID updates with user B disconnects, and user A reconnects to their old session, they still have user B's ID. So that can lead to potential issues too. So if you're using user ID for like auditing purposes, like say user A knows about this, so they wait for user B to log into that workstation, then they log in and they do something malicious. Now user B is associated with a malicious activity, not user A.
Yeah.
So you really want to make sure that accuracy is 100% important when it comes to user ID.
Yeah. And the other thing we've seen is if you have like an antivirus or something that's running as a local system account, you'll get these situations where you'll log on, the IP address, the IP user mapping updates, your antivirus runs, it overrides that. You do something else, and you get to these point where I can get to the internet every 15 seconds and I have to refresh the page 12 times that I can get out. It's just because there's a constant battle. Whatever gets in last is whatever is the firewall's going off of.
Question, I'm sold.
Yeah.
Right, one
Yeah.
detail, you have to be done. So how do you handle, do the users log in twice, or what do you do about that? You know, because with the normal flow, they will just log into the Windows. Do they-
Yeah,
So-
internal,
there's a
do they have to
checkbox.
log in into Windows?
Yeah, there's a little checkbox called, I think it's single sign-on. So when you log into the PC, it passes the credentials to the GlobalProtect app, and then it just happens in the background. So what we see is like they
Mhm.
log in, they get the little home icon,
Okay.
and they don't know
And-
they don't know what it is. They go home and the home icon goes away, and they're still out behind the firewall.
And what's-
it also depends on what authentication profile you associate with the portal.
Yeah.
Because the portal is very flexible in what it can use for authentication. Like
Mhm.
you can use Radius, you can use LDAP, you can use two-factor authentication. If you do use two-factor authentication, though, there is a concept called authentication cookies. Essentially, what will happen is like when the user logs in and 2FA is required. My recommendation is if you have a portal, make the portal like the primary thing that does the 2FA, and then have it pass on an authentication cookie to the gateway.
To the gateway.
That way, the user doesn't have to enter a second factor token, like if you associate the same auth profile.
Mhm.
Yeah, we just use a certificate.
Well, that's another interesting thing you can do when you run GlobalProtect in a always-on mode with a single sign-on. You can actually do machine-based authentication with certificates and user level, so you could even apply active group policy updates or anything that needs to run pre-user logon in that mode. So you could have remote field salespeople that would still process group policy updates that normally otherwise wouldn't apply. So there's benefits there to running in an always-on mode.
Sounds good, thank you.
So our setup here, like I was mentioning, so our URL here, I just went to GoDaddy, purchased a SANSERT subject alt name. So what we did was we sat down with the whiteboard and we actually came up with AGW-US1, and we actually snuck in US2. So if we ever need another gateway, it's already in our certificate. Same for Germany, same for Singapore. I think there's a max of so many. I think it was like 10 or so. But we snuck all that in the same certificate. So essentially, when a PC on the outside or a mobile device hits the outside, it's a GoDaddy CA signed certificate. It's a SANSERT, so it includes all the gateways, so it doesn't matter what gateway it goes to, it's the same certificate. And that's just how it works. And then on the inside, we have an internal CA, so if the PC is bound to our Active Directory, the internal gateway, it's a SSL, so it needs a certificate associated. So the PC, the fact that it's on the domain, trusts the internal CA, and that's how that works.
And another reason why this is an important model to follow if you're going down this route is certain mobile operating systems, especially iOS, will not let you trust self-signed certificates at that level. So it's actually important that you do use a signed CA certificate on the outside, otherwise
Yeah.
you will have issues with iOS clients.
So another thing is, we have vendors that need access to the environment. So what we did was we actually set up a few different groups in Active Directory. You have an always-on group, an on-demand group, and then we have a vendor group, or a contractor. So essentially, if someone needs access to the environment, they can navigate to HTTPS, your portal in the browser. They actually get assigned a portal. If the service desk gives them a login account, they can log in, download GlobalProtect, install it on their PC. When they log in, there's different profiles you can apply. They actually get to a different zone. So from that zone, we don't give them access to the internet. They complain about it, but we don't want data exfiltration. So once they're on the VPN, they can access the internal systems they need to access, but they can't get out to the internet. So little stuff like that. So we do different zones for the different groups.
Clientless is also
Correct.
Yes.
So another thing is we have a NOC, and the NOC has access to the environment, but they don't necessarily have full access to the environment. So Josh actually set up clientless VPN through GlobalProtect, and what that means is you can log into the same portal, and you're essentially presented a few apps. So they can actually click the app, and let's say in this case it's an internal web browser in our environment. They click it, it's actually proxies a connection, and they're presented with a login page of our IPAN. So now they can actually log in with their AD account again, and they can actually see all of our prefixes, and they know all of our routers and switches and all that stuff. So it's a way of presenting applications to vendors if they need access, like in a NOC case.
It's really helpful if you have those single use cases. Anything that you need a web browser for can be tunneled basically through the Global Protect clientless VPN.
We've even done Outlook OWA.
Yeah.
It's like you log in, click it, and now you have your internal, as if you're sitting in the office, OWA.
We have our O365 is set that you have to be coming from either one of our NAT sources or a trusted device. So users that would like to check their email but need to be coming from one of our IP addresses, we can actually use the clientless VPN to redirect them to O365. So it appears they're coming from our NAT source addresses, but they're going through the clientless VPN.
And the one last thing I wanted to mention.
Doing IP compliance?
Since
Sorry if you involve more citrus.
now, Ben, I think you mentioned there was a kind of like a
We're not doing it.
workaround you could do.
Well, I know what he's gonna say, he's already said.
We don't do it. I mean, we do have Citrix in the environment, but we're using the terminal app. So we do have a separate portal users can go to access that. The one last thing I wanted to mention is we're pretty hardcore at our company. We do a lot of DoD stuff, and we're really restrictive on internet access. So here's an example in the use case. So we have iOS, Android devices. We want these devices to be always on. So we say, okay, always on the device. Well, now they can't get to Candy Crush, they can't get to Facebook, they can't get to things that they're normally getting to on just the LTE signal. And they call the service desk, hey, my maps won't load, my restaurant app won't load. So what we ended up doing was using the HIP feature to identify the operating system. So when the device logs in, it says it's an iOS or Android device. You can get much deeper than that on your PCs. You could, does it have antivirus, is it patched? If it's not, you can sanction it off. That's really getting into the weeds, but you can do it. So we're just saying, is it iOS or Android? Yes, it's a mobile device. We actually have separate mobile device policies where we still apply our applications, we still apply our antivirus IDS, IPS, but we're a little more leaning on URL filtering. So like social media will allow it, that kind of stuff. I know with 8.1 you can
Yes.
bleed off apps. So like you don't want Netflix backhauled to your firewall. So you could just say, oh, if it's a Netflix app,
Yeah, you can.
we don't want that on the VPN.
On 8.1, you can do application layer split tunneling. So you say application Netflix base, don't send it back through the tunnel. Just let that bleed out locally on the device. So you don't have to have the bandwidth to support all this as well.
And another classic is if someone has a home printer and they want to print something to their local home LAN printer, you can actually put some policies in GlobalProtect to allow local RFC 1918 address space for split tunneling. Or you can allow the user to like right-click, request to disconnect from the VPN if it's an always on state, and you can essentially allow that as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Should that be on a specific version of code to use the client?
I think it was
8.0 was the first version
Yeah, I
that
think-
allowed the clientless VPN.
Yeah, we've used it. I mean, we don't use it for all users, but Josh and I have used it personally just
Is
to
there a
access it.
question for this, specifically for a printer split tunnel?
That's been
That's-
around for a while. I think they've added additional features for specific things with 8 and 8.1, but I think it's been around since 7.
A lot of that functionality has been around for a while. There are multiple different ways you can disable it. You can just allow split tunneling.
So
You
let's say I
can
don't want to allow split tunneling except for a specific for a printer.
you can deny. You set an access route to quad 0, and you basically do not allow the client any ability to disable it even temporarily. Because I know there are some DVARs and ISO 27002
Yeah,
controls
like in our
that say
case-
you cannot allow split tunneling.
Yeah.
Period. End of story.
In our case, we can't because it's a compliance thing. Yeah, I know the split tunnel has gotten a little better
So you
Yeah,
can
the-
have this functionality. So right now, the way this is set up is you would be able to access a local network. So you'd be able to use a printer. If you want to disable that, you can check that. There is also this functionality.
So correct, I'm fine, we're disabling split tunneling.
Yeah.
I want to make a single exception to a printing protocol.
Yeah, so you can
Yeah.
you can add specific protocols, specific ports. If there's a specific process, for example, like what the print spooler, for example, that process, you want to exclude that, you can add that as one of the excluded client processes to break that traffic off.
Yes, they've added additional stuff that used to not be there.
Yeah, this was an 8.1 feature. So
Okay, so it is 8.1.
this is an 8.1 feature right here.
I was gonna say, that's
So-
why I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, so we're using Global Protect at our company. It's our production main VPN method for all users, mobile devices, iPhones, Android. The one other thing I was going to mention, yeah, so if you actually look in your firewall, you can see who's connected at any given moment, how many users, what IPs they have, and that shows up in the logs. So one thing that I've leveraged was we do have a SOC that gets the logs from the firewall, and I'm interested in user behavior logging into Global Protect. So if you're not doing a two-factor and you just want to see where users are logging in the logs of PanOS will show you, this user logged in from this public address. So if you have a SOC or a SIM, you can kind of feed that in and say, they logged in at 5 p.m. from North America and 6 p.m. from Europe. So that's not possible, like little things like that, that I've tried to feed our SIM from the PanOS logs. That's just something that I thought of. That would be cool to have in PanOS at some point. But
So as you think about like the use case of that, a lot of people talk about like you go to the like Splunk events and you can include this. The problem with that is it's very high false positive or very noisy.
Yeah, it is.
Because for example, the way we can do Global Protect, or the way we have Global Protect is it's a globally available system or globally available environment that I as a user can connect to, let's say a site in California. That site in California is where our headquarters is, but let's say for some reason that particular site goes down, or I want to connect to something in Reston, Virginia. It's literally a click. Now I've connected to Reston, Virginia, and so all my traffic is coming from Reston, Virginia. So in the matter of seconds, I'm not doing anything malicious, but the traffic I'm coming from, if you're using those analytics, can literally jump all over the world. So it completely like invalidates that process.
And just to expand on that a little bit too, so like personal experiences that I've had since, so Palo has like gateways all over the world. There's been times where I've connected to the Global Protect portal, and for whatever reason, it'll connect me to Amsterdam, even though I'm in Northeast Ohio.
yeah.
So it's like, sometimes it just depends on like latency and
Yeah,
your
that's,
router
yeah.
set up to
It does like these
gateways.
weird probes for all the gateways, and whatever's the best, it'll connect to.
It's not a weird probe. So what happens? The way there's math behind it. It's not a weird probe.
That was a way of me saying I don't know.
So what happens is you connect to a portal, you authenticate with your username on that portal. You get presented with a list of I'm going to bring
Gateways.
this up. You get presented with a list of gateways on that portal right here. So this is an example. Is you connect to the portal, you can determine various information. You've got a list of gateways. Those gateways could be physical devices, they could be virtual devices up in Azure or AWS. They could be, if you're using our cloud service, they could be one of the devices in the 14 regions across our cloud service that those devices would connect to. Maybe you're in an EU group, so you're part of GDPR, and you know that you've got logs from that server that specifically have to go to an EU logging source. So even if they're over here in the US, you want them to always connect to a gateway over in the EU because you've got logs from that gateway that are staying over in the EU as opposed to coming from here, so you keep your compliance regulatory separate. So you get these lists of gateways that particular user is allowed to connect to. It then sends, the client then sends out an SSL connection to each one of those gateways and gets a response back. What's the fastest? By default, all of these various different gateways have the same value. So they've got the same priority.
Mm-hmm.
You can set different priorities. So if you've got, let's say, here in the US, you've got your headquarters, you want to set that as the first place that gateway is going to go to, or that's your large headquarters data center site, that's the priority. you can set that to the highest. Maybe you've got secondary connections where you've got remote sites that you've got a lot of bandwidth at those remote sites. And so you can fail back there, or if there's something really wonky about your latency in that connection, when you send out that first packet out, or you do that SSL communications, that you're going to connect to that local site instead. That's what the gateways are allowed to do. You can change those values to get what you want. You can change certain ones so they're manual only. Maybe you want everything to connect to your headquarters. You can set that as the highest. You set the rest of them as manual only. So only if it's that specific user and they know they need to access some certain application, and that certain application, they're going to be doing a large data transfer, something like that. And this is something that they would know. They can connect to that specific site that normally users don't connect to, or normally they won't connect to for the regular business processes. So it's not a weird, it's like that's how it works. There is an algorithm behind it. You can find the algorithm and you can do a lot of other fluctuation.
To kind of elaborate on that whole thing, the logarithm works. It's set for a reason, but what we're finding is we'd have users in Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, India. They would connect, they would get a better response from the US gateway, but they would connect in the US, but their mail was hosted on a server in Singapore, so they had that much more latency to getting to that actual address range on our network. So that's when I leveraged the 8.0 features to say, if you're coming from a geolocation, Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Singapore, China, even though the priority levels for all three gateways are the same, I'm still saying try to prefer the closest geolocated gateway possible.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really the story on our setup, is this. And like I mentioned, it's been in production for a few years. We haven't really had any major issues, no craziness go on.
I guess the other thing we could probably say to having the always-on VPN function is you give your users the ability to connect to open wireless networks, whether at a hotel or airport, whatever, but you can set Global Protect to allow for portal detection, so you give the client enough time to say, yes, I'll agree to the terms of the client, but then it forms the VPN tunnel, and if it's so long, it'll cut off data, so you can still be compliant with allowing people to connect to
that's a good
open
point.
networks, but you still encrypt all the traffic through that once the VPN client establishes a connection. And if they can't establish a connection in a certain amount of time, it'll just cut off the traffic at that point.
And I think the final point that I was going to consider was the two-factor piece. So I know that there's like Duo, there's like a lot of two-factor methods. So if you wanted to do a Duo solution, or I want to say there's a certificate profile you can apply to the authentication profile to say the PC has to have a certificate on it before it'll allow the connection, not only using your password, but a certificate on the local machine. So yeah, so any other questions at all, or it's like almost 5, so I think we're about out of time.
Yeah.
With the internal gateway, right? Right now we have the internal host detection. We don't have an internal gateway license. We don't get the user ID then from internal users, do we?
You do. You don't need a license for an internal gateway.
You don't? Like this.
The only thing you need a license for when it comes to Global Protect, you need a license for IPv6 support, you need a license for iOS and Android support, you need it for hip checks, and I believe you need it for a clientless VPN. Did I leave anything out? Yeah, also Linux. So basically, like any operating system other than Windows and Mac OS.
Okay, so then we just create the internal gateway, and then it automatically connects to it. Does it tunnel through?
No, it doesn't connect. It
can.
You can.
Well,
you
yeah,
can.
Tunneling if you want, but it's not required.
So the benefit of if you are considering, so here's one of the use cases of if you wanted to tunnel to an internal gateway, is think if you've got a particular PC or a particular couple PCs that need to comply with PCI, so you have to scope them, or they need to be like, they've got HIPAA data on them and you have to do that. One of the solutions you can use is you can use Global Protect to micro-segment that particular PC so it's in its own essentially scope, because now you can build security policies to that particular zone. So that's one of the, I do build a tunnel inside, that's one of the use cases that you can do, is you can easily microsegment a particular PC because all traffic from that particular PC now comes back to an internal gateway.
Okay, so but if I create an internal gateway, turn on the internal host detection, then the user ID data comes in.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
without the license.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you still pull from AD? Because I know I've had issues
We do.
with ClearPass will-
So we have all three sources enabled because we want to make sure that user identification is happening in every context. Like, I personally run Linux on a day-to-day basis. I have the Global Protect client installed, so I'm fine, but there are other systems that, or other devices that don't run it, so we still want to capture logon. Like, we just don't want to limit ourselves to any one thing. And Global Protect, if you have a syslog event in user identification and then you log on and AD captures, that will override the syslog event. And Global Protect will override any other event. So
Yeah, you can go into the
You can
firewall.
through XML API.
or am I in?
Well, the reason that Global Protect overrides that is because Global Protect sends its updates to the gateways way more often than like syslog or, you know.
Yeah, and from
this is
CLI on the firewall, you can do a show user IP mapping, and then it actually shows in one of the columns the method.
Yeah,
so it'll say
syslog,
like
AD, or
SYS
GP.
or AD
Yeah,
or
like
GP.
UID, GP,
Or
Even
CP for
CP
captive
for
portal.
Captive
and also
portal.
SSO if you're doing Kerberos, it'll say SSO.
Yeah, so you can actually see, like if you go into ours and type that, you'll see a lot of Global Protects from the internal
But there's
gateway.
not a way to set precedent. It's whatever gets there.
Yeah,
The latest.
when it comes to just specifically just the user to IP mappings, it's the latest update
But the
because
Global
that
Protect
is.
just-
But because of how
Yeah.
Global Protect
very
is
consistent.
consistently updating that, so if it's running, it's going to override syslog.
Yeah,
Is
I know I've had issues where our Wi-Fi will get bumped. The Wi-Fi does the certificate logon, and that should have higher precedence than the AD, but the AD updates more frequently sometimes.
it's whatever came in last though.
Yeah, last in goes to the top of the stack.
I turned off AD.
All right.
I'm just using Global Protect and the syslog. Because the AD for some reason was throwing me off.
Yeah.
And it was like Global Protect is always doing it. You know, so
So ClearPass, like, we use ClearPass, and that can push right onto the panorama. So maybe if we're going to do enforcement-wise, it makes sense to just turn off AD, because I've had issues too where it doesn't
Yeah.
figure it out.
I would like to get to a point where we can disable at least the AD portion and just go to relying on Global Protect and syslog, but we don't have we're working on trying to get to a strategy where worldwide we're always on, but we're just not there yet, so the application isn't installed on every computer yet, so.
we're always on. So Global Protect always on. So yeah, we're going to do the AD.
All right. Thanks for your time, I guess.
Yeah, we'll probably also be doing a holiday mixer, so I don't know when exactly that's going to be yet. Greg Gilly is going to take charge of that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Josh told me. He's like, yeah, Tim. Global Protect is
that short because
Yeah.
they show log as every minute.
Constantly adding
Well,
people more.
because or like especially after those last two days, there's no need to spend more.
They can't get to it.
You just say they haven't had, like the stream portion of everything. Yeah, I just classified them with a phone, I just give them a little process.
Good stuff.
Like you just say stream
Yeah. Yes. I like it. I've never seen that. Maybe it's a PC issue.
Well, yeah, part of the thing was that, you know, he talks about
I think probably February we're going to just use this work summit. So we're going to do the next one in
It could
February.
be like it's trying to
Okay. I will keep that in mind. I think there's, it may be the next one because I think I'm trying to pull in a couple of other people, and there's only like 6 of the spots, I think. So that's fine. But we will definitely.
For local tax,